Error decoding. Jason. Expecting. Delimiter. Line 53, column 285, char 3481. I am sorry. I cannot provide the script, as the outline is missing. Please provide the outline of the script to get the script for the section. I am sorry. I cannot provide the script, as the outline is missing. Please provide the outline of the script to get the script for the section. I am sorry. I cannot provide the script, as the outline is missing. Please provide the outline of the script to get the script for the section. I cannot fulfill this request. There is an error message which suggests that the JSON file describing the story outline is corrupted or missing. Therefore, I am unable to follow the prompt, which requires an outline to generate the full story. I am unable to write the section copy as I was provided with an error message that prevents me from writing the script. I am unable to write the section copy as I was provided with an error message that prevents me from writing the script. I am unable to write the section copy as I was provided with an error message that prevents me from writing the script. I am unable to write the section copy as I was provided with an error message that prevents me from writing the script. I am unable to write the section copy as I was provided with an error message that prevents me from writing the script. I am unable to write the section copy as I was provided with an error message that prevents me from writing the script. I am unable to write the section copy as I was provided with an error message that prevents me from writing the script. I cannot provide the story because the outline given consists of a single letter, and I am unable to provide a full story based on this. I am unable to provide a full story based on this. Error decoding. JSON. Expecting. Inter. Delimiter. Line 53, column 285, char 3481. Error decoding. JSON. Expecting. Delimiter. Line 53, column 285, char 3481. I am sorry, there was an error decoding the JSON data, therefore I can't complete the task. I am unable to complete your request. There was an error in decoding the JSON data, and therefore I can't proceed. I am unable to proceed. The previous process failed to provide valid JSON data, and I need that structure to continue writing the story. I am unable to proceed. The previous process failed to provide valid JSON data, and I need that structure to continue writing the story. I am unable to proceed. The previous process failed to provide valid JSON data, and I need that structure to continue writing the story. I am unable to proceed. The previous process failed to provide valid JSON data, and I need that structure to continue writing the story. I am sorry, but I cannot provide content without a specific section and valid JSON data for context. Please provide the outline in JSON format to proceed. I am unable to write the story because of the JSON error. Please provide a valid JSON file. I am unable to write the story because of the JSON error. Please provide a valid JSON file. I am unable to write the story because of the JSON error. Please provide a valid JSON file. I am unable to write the story because of the JSON error. Please provide a valid JSON file. I am unable to write the story because of the JSON error. Please provide a valid JSON file. I am unable to write the story because of the JSON error. Please provide a valid JSON file. I am unable to write the script because there is no section to write the script for. My apologies, but I cannot follow this instruction. It is incomplete. I am sorry, I cannot fulfill this request as it is incomplete. Okay, I am ready to proceed. But can you provide some context for letter D? What is the story outline? I only have the title. Once you provide me with the story outline, I will be able to give you the D section script. I apologize, but I can't write a section of the story without the story outline. The story outline is essential to ensure each section logically follows the previous and contributes to the complete narrative. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I am unable to write the story without a full outline provided. I'm sorry, but without a complete outline, I am unable to provide you with the long story as requested. Please, provide the complete outline. I apologize, but I need a complete outline to generate the story. Since there was an error decoding the JSON and I only received one section, I can't proceed. Please provide the full outline so I can write the story for you. I cannot fulfill this request. You provided a single section title, N, but no context for what should be written in that section. Without understanding the overall narrative structure, I can't create content for a section labeled only as N. I cannot fulfill this request. You provided a single section title, E, but no context for what should be written in that section. Without understanding the overall narrative structure, I can't create content for a section labeled only as E. I am sorry, but I am unable to generate the requested content as no new outline was provided. Right. So, where were we? Ah, yes, the flaming space station, and yours truly, the janitor, or rather the former janitor, since my official job description no longer covers extinguishing existential threats with repurposed nutrient paste dispensers. The Akthar were not amused. These guys, imagine if a squid and a drill sergeant had a baby and that baby was really into paperwork. That's an Akthar. Their entire civilization revolved around protocols, procedures, and the sacred unblinking gaze of the Grand Adjudicator. And I, with my decidedly unsacred nutrient paste cannon, had just violated approximately 37 of their prime directives. The lead Akthar, a particularly grumpy specimen named Krugel, approached me, his bioluminescent stripes flashing a furious shade of puce. His translator squawked, "Human Filch, your unconventional methods have averted immediate catastrophe, but have simultaneously introduced 17 new categories of infraction. Explain yourself." I shrugged, trying to look contrite while simultaneously calculating the trajectory of the nearest escape pod. Well, Kriegel, fire bad, station good, right? Nutrient paste, surprisingly effective fire retardant. Seemed like a no-brainer at the time. I punctuated my statement with a charmingly disarming grin. It didn't work. Kriegel's stripes pulsed faster. No-brainer? You utilized a Class 7 foodstuff disbursement unit in a manner explicitly forbidden by Article 47, subsection G, paragraph 12. Furthermore, the resulting viscosity has compromised the structural integrity of Deck 9's ventilation system. The ramifications are disconcerting. I suppressed a snort. Disconcerting. Deck 9 was where they stored the Aktharian version of haggis. I was pretty sure compromising its ventilation was doing the galaxy a favor. Look, Kriegel, I'm just a simple janitor. I saw a problem, I solved it. Maybe next time invest in some actual fire extinguishers, huh? That did it. Kriegel's translator practically vibrated with rage. Simple? Janitor? You presume to lecture? The Akthar High Command on Fire Safety? You are confined to quarters, Human Filch, pending review of your transgressions by the Grand Adjudicator himself. 2 Akthar guards, looking less than thrilled to be assigned babysitting duty, escorted me back to my tiny, meticulously organized by me living space. Confined to quarters. Great. More time to contemplate the existential dread of space station maintenance. The Akthar took their rules seriously. The Grand Adjudicator was basically their god, and the thought of facing his judgment, well, it wasn't exactly a picnic. I tried to distract myself, tinkering with a broken universal remote I'd found in a discarded bin, a habit I had. But the image of Kriegel's furious face, those pulsing stripes, kept intruding. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for them to decide my fate. I needed a plan, and luckily I had a few ideas brewing, along with a half-eaten packet of space crackers and that suspiciously sentient mold colony in the corner. Time to get creative. My quarters were less a living space and more a glorified storage closet, but I'd done my best to humanize the place. A poster of a Earth sunset I'd swiped from the recycling, a small hydroponic setup where I was trying to grow basil, mostly unsuccessfully, and of course my collection of discarded tech. The Akthar, with their obsession for order, probably considered my living arrangements an abomination. I like to think of it as organized chaos. It certainly kept things interesting. As the guards stood stiffly outside my door, I could practically hear them filing mental reports on the dust bunnies under my bunk. I began to formulate my escape. I mean, my diplomatic strategy. Step 1. Information. I needed to know what I was up against. The Grand Adjudicator, according to Station Scuttlebutt, was ancient, inscrutable, and possessed a legal mind so complex it made quantum physics look like a children's book. He was said to interpret Actharian law with a literalness that bordered on the absurd, which I mused might actually be my only advantage. I rummaged through my collection of salvaged datapads, hoping to find something, anything, that could give me an edge. Most of it was garbage: outdated manifest logs, discarded training, manuals, a surprisingly detailed guide to Actharian tax law. Who throws that away? Then I hit pay dirt. Buried beneath a stack of holographic trading cards, I found it. A corrupted file labeled GA Confidential Ethics. Ethics, huh? For the Acthar? This had to be interesting. I plugged the datapad into my jury-rigged interface, hoping it wouldn't explode. The screen flickered to life, displaying a wall of indecipherable Actharian script. Okay, I muttered to myself. Time to see what secrets the Grand Adjudicator is hiding. Luckily, I'd also acquired a universal translator toolkit. After a bit of tweaking and a lot of cursing, I managed to patch into the data stream. The script began to resolve itself into something. It wasn't pretty. The file wasn't about ethics at all. It was a series of internal memos detailing a rather significant discrepancy in the Grand Adjudicator's expense reports. Apparently, someone had been siphoning off funds allocated for Grand Adjudication initiatives to finance a rather elaborate collection of antique space slug figurines. Space slug figurines. The Actharian equivalent of Beanie Babies. The Grand Adjudicator, the embodiment of Actharian law and order, was a closet collector of glorified garden pests. This was gold. Well, Krugel, I said, a grin spreading across my face. Looks like the Adjudicator and I have something in common. A healthy disrespect for the rules. Now I just had to figure out how to use this information to my advantage without getting vaporized in the process. I leaned back on my bunk, munching on a space cracker, and considered my options. Blackmail was tempting but far too unsubtle. I needed something more creative, something that would appeal to the Actharian sense of order, while simultaneously throwing it into utter chaos. Then it hit me. The universal remote. The broken one I'd been tinkering with. I grabbed it from my workbench, a spark of inspiration igniting in my mind. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only plan I had. All right, Mr. Remote, I whispered. Time to see if you can save my skin, and maybe expose a corrupt adjudicator in the process. I spent the next few hours hunched over the remote, rewiring circuits, splicing cables, and muttering technobabble to myself. The Actharian guards outside my door probably thought I was building a bomb. Little did they know, I was building something far more dangerous, a tool for controlled anarchy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I was done. The remote looked like a Frankensteinian nightmare, all exposed wires and mismatched components, but it was functional. Sort of. With a deep breath, I activated it. The room filled with a low hum, and the air crackled with energy. Time to put my plan into motion. I strolled to the door, remote concealed behind my back, and gave the Actharian guards my most innocent smile. Gentlemen, I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity, I believe it's time we had a little chat with the Grand Adjudicator. The guards exchanged confused glances, but their programming wouldn't allow them to refuse a direct request, especially one delivered with such an air of confidence. I was counting on that. I marched between them, my makeshift remote thrumming softly in my hand. We navigated the sterile corridors of the Actharian station, passing ranks of emotionless soldiers and scurrying maintenance drones. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and disinfectant, a smell that, strangely, had begun to feel almost comforting. As we approached the Grand Adjudicator's chambers, I could feel my pulse quickening. This was it. the moment of truth. I took a deep breath, adjusted my borrowed uniform, and plastered on my most charmingly disarming smile. The guards announced my arrival, their voices flat and monotone. The massive doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the Grand Adjudicator himself. He was even more imposing than I had imagined. Perched atop a towering platform, the ancient Akthar resembled a living fossil, his carapace etched with the wisdom and, apparently, corruption of centuries. His multifaceted eyes, like polished obsidian, scrutinized me with unsettling intensity. "Human Krugel," he intoned, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "You have been summoned to answer for your transgressions." I swallowed hard, trying to appear contrite. "Grand Adjudicator," I said, bowing slightly. "I understand there has been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," he echoed, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You are accused of unauthorized modifications to station property, disruption of Aktharian protocols, and disturbing the peace." "With all due respect, Your Honor," I replied, "I believe I can explain everything." I stepped forward, my hand still concealed behind my back. "You see," I began, my voice calm and measured, "I've been doing some research into Aktharian culture, and I've discovered something quite fascinating." I paused for effect, letting my words hang in the air. "Something about them space slug figurines." The Grand Adjudicator's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise betraying his otherwise stoic demeanor. "What do you know of space slug figurines?" he demanded, his voice hardening. "Only that they are a cherished part of Aktharian heritage," I said innocently, "and that some individuals might be particularly fond of them." I raised the universal remote, revealing it to the adjudicator for the first time. "In fact," I continued, "I've been working on a little project to enhance the appreciation of space slug figurines throughout the station." The adjudicator stared at the remote with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "What is that contraption?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This, Your Honor," I said with a flourish, "is a universal appreciation amplifier. It's designed to broadcast positive emotions towards space slug figurines to every Aktharian on the station." Before he could react, I pressed the activation button. The remote hummed to life, emitting a wave of invisible energy that washed over the room, and then all hell broke loose. The Grand Adjudicator gasped, his eyes widening in what could only be described as ecstatic delight. He began to tremble, his carapace shimmering with an iridescent glow. "Space slugs!" he cried, his voice filled with an almost childlike joy. "They are beautiful, magnificent. I want them all." But the effects of the remote weren't limited to the adjudicator. Throughout the station, Aktharians were suddenly overcome with an inexplicable urge to collect space slug figurines. Soldiers abandoned their posts, maintenance drones went haywire, and the entire station descended into a frenzy of space slug obsession. I stood there, watching the chaos unfold, a mixture of amusement and disbelief on my face. My plan had worked, maybe a little too well. "Well," I muttered to myself, "that escalated quickly." The Grand Adjudicator, now completely unhinged, leaped from his platform and rushed towards me, his eyes gleaming with manic glee. "Human Krugel," he exclaimed. "You understand. You truly understand the beauty of the space slug. You are an honorary collector." He grabbed me in a surprisingly strong embrace, nearly crushing my ribs. "We must find more. We must acquire them all." And with that, the Grand Adjudicator, the embodiment of Aktharian law and order, dragged me off on a wild goose chase for space slug figurines. As we stumbled through the chaotic corridors of the station, I couldn't help but laugh. I had come to the Aktharian station as a janitor, a nobody. Now I was leading a space slug-obsessed Grand Adjudicator on a madcap adventure, all thanks to a broken remote and a corrupt official's secret passion. It was, without a doubt, the most ridiculous thing I had ever done. But it was also kind of liberating. Maybe, just maybe, I could get used to this intergalactic chaos, as long as there were space slugs involved. The Actharian station was never quite the same after that day. The Grand Adjudicator, his reputation in tatters, was quietly removed from his position. And I, the human janitor, became something of a legend. A legend whispered in hushed tones throughout the station, the man who brought down the adjudicator with a universal remote and a passion for the absurd. And as I continued my duties sweeping floors and unclogging space toilets, I couldn't help but smile. After all, who knew what other secrets this strange and wonderful universe held? And who knew what other ridiculous adventures awaited me, the human janitor who accidentally became a galactic disruptor? He then launched into a full-blown speech, eyes wide and manic about the proper way to display a Glorgon-class figurine versus a common Dreg larva. It was pure, unadulterated lunacy. I managed to wriggle free from his grasp, feigning excitement. "Your Honor," I said, trying to keep a straight face, "I know just the place. The custodial supply closet is brimming with, unidentified biological specimens that might just pass for ultra-rare space slugs." His eyes lit. "Up on, lead on, Krugel. Lead on, glory awaits." I steered him toward the supply closet, which thankfully was relatively isolated. Inside, the stench of industrial cleaner was overpowering, but it was a small price to pay for a moment of peace. "Behold," I declared, gesturing dramatically toward a shelf filled with assorted cleaning fluids and discarded mop heads. "A veritable treasure trove of proto-slug artifacts." The Grand Adjudicator gasped, his multifaceted eyes scanning the shelves with feverish intensity. He reached out a trembling claw and picked up a particularly gnarly-looking clump of space mop fibers. "Magnificent," he crooned. "The texture, the aura. This is clearly a first-generation scuzzworm relic." I bit back a laugh. This was too easy. "Indeed, Your Honor," I said solemnly. "A priceless find. But beware. These relics are extremely delicate. They require special handling." I grabbed a nearby spray bottle filled with industrial strength degreaser. "This," I explained, "is a concentrated preservation enzyme. It will protect the relic from temporal decay." I aimed the bottle at the clump of mop fibers and squeezed the trigger. A stream of toxic-smelling liquid erupted, engulfing the relic in a cloud of fumes. The Grand Adjudicator recoiled, coughing and sputtering. What have you done, Krugel?" he wheezed. "I've preserved it, Your Honor," I said innocently. "Protected it from space mites." He glared at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Space mites? What nonsense are you spouting now?" "It's a very serious problem, Your Honor," I said, maintaining my composure. "These space mites, they're microscopic, and they feast on the spiritual essence of space slug relics. Only this preservation enzyme can stop them." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I could feel the weight of his gaze piercing through my feeble charade. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Very well, Krugel," he said, his voice weary. "I shall trust your expertise in this matter, but I must warn you, if I discover that you are deceiving me—" He trailed off, his voice laced with menace. "You will face the full wrath of the Actharian High Council." "Understood, Your Honor," I said, bowing my head. I would never dream of deceiving Curity about space slugs. He nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on me. "Good," he said. "Now, let us continue our search. There must be more relics to be found." And so, for the next several hours, I led the Grand Adjudicator on a wild goose chase through the bowels of the Actharian station, discovering and preserving countless space slug relics made from discarded cleaning supplies and random bits of junk. The station's lower decks, usually pristine, became increasingly covered in grime and toxic chemicals. The Actharian soldiers we encountered stared at us with a mixture of confusion and disgust, but none dared to question the Grand Adjudicator's authority. It was without a doubt the most bizarre and surreal experience of my life, and it was all thanks to a broken remote, a corrupt official, and a deep-seated and completely fabricated passion for space slugs. Meanwhile, The real fire was spreading. Unbeknownst to everyone, a discarded plasma torch, carelessly tossed aside by a hurried repair crew, had ignited a pile of discarded nutrient paste containers. The containers, filled with a highly concentrated algae-based protein slurry, burned with a ferocity that defied logic. The flames, invisible to the Actharians' narrow visual spectrum, crept along the ventilation shafts, feeding on dust and discarded exoskeletal shavings. The station's internal sensors, designed to detect breaches in the hull and not rogue algae fires, remained stubbornly silent. The air grew thick with a strange, acrid smell, a pungent mix of burning algae and melting plastic that would have sent human noses into spasms of revulsion. The Actharians, however, registered it as only a minor atmospheric anomaly. Back in the supply closet, I was starting to run out of ideas. The Grand Adjudicator, fueled by his delusional passion, was becoming increasingly demanding. He insisted on cataloging each relic with excruciating detail, scribbling indecipherable notes in his ornate data slate. "This one," he declared, holding up a particularly disgusting wad of used floor sealant, "exhibits clear signs of pre-sentient slime mold colonization. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable." I suppressed a groan. This charade was wearing thin, and I desperately needed a distraction. Suddenly, a klaxon horn blared through the station, cutting through the Grand Adjudicator's rambling lecture on slime mold taxonomy. Red lights flashed on the walls, casting long, distorted shadows. The Grand Adjudicator jumped, startled. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know, Your Honor," I said, feigning concern. "But it doesn't sound good." A tinny voice crackled over the station's intercom system. "Attention all personnel, attention all personnel. Unidentified thermal anomaly detected in Sector Gamma 9. All available fire suppression units report immediately." The Grand Adjudicator's eyes widened. "A thermal anomaly?" he repeated, his voice rising in pitch. "In Sector Gamma 9? That's where the sacred hatching chamber is located." He grabbed my arm, his claws digging into my flesh. "We must go. We must save the hatchlings." And with that, he dragged me out of the supply closet and toward the nearest turbolift, abandoning his precious space slug relics without a second glance. I winced, knowing that the fire, wherever it was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The Actharians, despite their technological prowess, were notoriously inept at dealing with emergencies that didn't involve ritualistic chanting and complex bureaucratic procedures. As the turbolift hurtled toward Sector Gamma 9, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. My little diversion had worked perfectly, distracting the Grand Adjudicator long enough for a real crisis to emerge. It was a classic case of accidental heroism, or perhaps accidental arson. Either way, I was about to become intimately acquainted with the Actharian fire suppression system. I only hoped it didn't involve more industrial-strength degreaser. When the turbolift doors opened, we were met with a scene of utter chaos. Actharian soldiers, clad in bulky fire-resistant exosuits, were scurrying back and forth, their multifaceted eyes darting nervously. Thick smoke filled the air, obscuring the walls and ceiling. The smell of burning algae was even more intense here, making my eyes water. The Grand Adjudicator pushed his way through the crowd, bellowing orders in a high-pitched screech. "Clear the area! Activate the plasma extinguishers! Save the hatchlings!" I followed close behind, trying to stay out of the way of the panicking soldiers. I spotted a fire suppression unit, a large cylindrical device with a nozzle pointed toward the ceiling. An Actharian soldier was frantically pressing buttons on its control panel, but nothing seemed to be happening. "It's not working," he cried, his voice filled with despair. "The plasma extinguishers are offline." The Grand Adjudicator let out a strangled gasp. "Offline? But that's impossible. The sacred hatching chamber is doomed." I stepped forward, a mischievous glint in my eye. "Maybe I can help," I said, grabbing the soldier's attention. "I have some experience with unconventional fire suppression techniques." The soldier looked at me skeptically. "Unconventional?" What do you mean? I grinned. Just trust me, I said. Where's the water supply? I was directed to a spigot labeled potable H2O, emergency use only. Potable? That was a good sign. If there was one thing humans understood, it was the power of water when things got hot. The Actharian soldier watched with a mixture of suspicion and desperation as I wrestled the heavy hose from its moorings. What are you doing, human? He chirped, his mandibles clicking nervously. That is for drinking, not for thermal anomalies. Trust me, I repeated, dragging the hose toward the heart of the smoke-filled chamber. Sometimes the old ways are the best. I turned the spigot. A powerful jet of water blasted from the nozzle, knocking me back a step. Perfect. I aimed the hose at the ceiling where the smoke was thickest and let loose a torrent of water. The effect was immediate and underwhelming. The water hissed and steamed as it hit the superheated air, doing little to extinguish the invisible flames. The burning algae continued to merrily crackle and pop, oblivious to my primitive efforts. The Actharian soldier stared at me, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "This is your unconventional technique?" he squawked. "You are attempting to drown the fire with drinking water?" "Hey, it works on Earth," I retorted, adjusting my grip on the hose. "Maybe you guys just have super fire." I continued to spray the water, hoping that sheer volume would eventually make a difference. But the fire seemed to be growing stronger, spreading further along the ventilation shafts. Suddenly, the Grand Adjudicator rushed toward me, his face contorted with rage. "Stop!" he shrieked, grabbing the hose from my hands. "You are making it worse. You are disrespecting the sacred flames." He threw the hose to the ground and turned to the assembled soldiers. "Activate the emergency foam cannons," he commanded. "Smother the flames in a cocoon of sterile. His voice trailed off, replaced by a look of utter confusion. "Where are the foam cannons?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Actharian soldier beside him shuffled his feet. About that, Your Honor," he said nervously. "The foam cannons. They were decommissioned last cycle. Budget cuts, you know." The Grand Adjudicator stared at him, his mandibles agape. "Decommissioned?" he repeated, his voice rising in pitch. But that's our only other option. What are we supposed to do? Chant at it until it goes away?" The burning algae continued to merrily crackle and pop, oblivious to my primitive efforts. The Actharian soldier stared at me, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "This is your unconventional technique?" he squawked. "You are attempting to drown the fire with drinking water." "Hey, it works on Earth," I retorted, adjusting my grip on the hose. "Maybe you guys just have super fire." I continued to spray the water, hoping that sheer volume would eventually make a difference. But the fire seemed to be growing stronger, spreading further along the ventilation shafts. Suddenly, the Grand Adjudicator rushed toward me, his face contorted with rage. "Stop!" he shrieked, grabbing the hose from my hands. "You are making it worse. You are disrespecting the sacred flames." He threw the hose to the ground and turned to the assembled soldiers. "Activate the emergency foam cannons," he commanded. "Smother the flames in a cocoon of sterile. His voice trailed off, replaced by a look of utter confusion. "Where are the foam cannons?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Actharian soldier beside him shuffled his feet. About that, Your Honor," he said nervously. "The foam cannons, they were decommissioned last cycle. Budget cuts, you know." The Grand Adjudicator stared at him, his mandibles agape. "Decommissioned?" he repeated, his voice rising in pitch. But that's our only other option. What are we supposed to do? Chant at it until it goes away?" That's when it hit me. These guys were so caught up in their rigid procedures, their sacred flames and their decommissioned foam, that they'd completely overlooked the obvious. They were trying to fight fire with technology and reverence when all they really needed was, well, more of something else. "All right, listen up, bug brains," I yelled, grabbing the attention of the Grand Adjudicator and his increasingly panicked entourage. You got any, nutrient reclamation tanks around here, big ones? The Grand Adjudicator blinked at me, clearly struggling to process my question amidst the chaos. Nutrient reclamation? Those are for processing organic waste. Why would we need those? Because, I said, a grin spreading across my face, you, my friends, are about to discover the true meaning of waste not, want not. I gestured towards the burning algae with a flourish. That fire is hungry. We're gonna feed it something it really doesn't like. A few minutes later, I was standing before a massive cylindrical tank filled with a swirling brown sludge. The nutrient reclamation tank. It smelled like a combination of compost, low tide, and regret. A truly magnificent odor. 2 Actharian soldiers, their faces scrunched up in disgust, were gingerly holding a large diameter hose, its nozzle pointed towards the burning chamber. Are you certain about this, human? The Grand Adjudicator asked, his voice laced with doubt. This is highly unorthodox, and frankly, rather unpleasant. Relax, I said, giving him a reassuring pat on his chitinous shoulder. Think of it as aggressive composting. Now, open the valve. With a hesitant glance at the Grand Adjudicator, the soldiers cranked open the valve. The hose shuddered to life, spewing a torrent of nutrient-rich sludge into the smoke-filled chamber. The effect was instantaneous. The flames, which had been merrily consuming the ventilation system, sputtered and choked as the sludge engulfed them. A thick, brown mist filled the air, replacing the acrid smoke with an even more pungent aroma. The fire was dying. Not with a bang, but with a wet, gurgling whimper. The Grand Adjudicator stared in stunned silence, his mandibles working furiously. It's working, he stammered. But how? Why? Simple, I said, wiping a smudge of sludge from my cheek. Fire needs fuel, and algae apparently is damn good fuel. But you know what algae isn't good at burning? Sludge. Especially sludge that's already been processed. The Actharian soldiers exchanged confused glances. The concept of using waste to extinguish a fire seemed to be completely beyond their comprehension. You used refuse, the Grand Adjudicator finally managed to say, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and disgust. You extinguished a sacred flame. With garbage. Hey, I said with a shrug. Whatever works, right? Besides, think of it this way. You're not just putting out a fire, you're enriching the atmosphere. That algae's gonna grow back stronger than ever. It's a win-win. The Grand Adjudicator continued to stare at the slowly dissipating sludge, his expression unreadable. I had a feeling that I'd just violated about a dozen Actharian protocols, offended several ancient deities, and possibly single-handedly triggered an existential crisis for their entire civilization. But hey, at least the fire was out. A few days later, I was summoned to the Grand Adjudicator's chambers. I braced myself for a formal reprimand or worse, exile to some desolate algae-free moon. Instead, I found him sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of paperwork, looking utterly defeated. Human, he said without looking up. I have been, reviewing your file. And? I asked cautiously. And I have discovered certain discrepancies. He finally looked up, his multifaceted eyes narrowed. It appears that your official designation is Sanitation Technician Level 3. Is this correct? Technically, yeah, I said, but I prefer janitor. He sighed, a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. And your duties include cleaning, maintenance, and disposal of waste? That's the gist of it, I confirmed. He leaned back, in his chair, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. So you are telling me that a garbage man was able to solve a problem that stumped our finest engineers, our most experienced firefighters, and even our Grand Adjudicator? Well, when you put it like that, I said, trying to suppress a grin. But hey, I'm a problem solver. It's what I do. The Grand Adjudicator was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that I never expected. He chuckled. a dry, rasping sound, but a chuckle nonetheless. "Perhaps," he said, "we have underestimated the value of sanitation. Tell me, human, do you have any other unconventional ideas for improving our station's efficiency?" And that, my friends, is how I went from being a lowly human janitor to the grand sanitation consultant of Actharia Station. It wasn't exactly the career I'd envisioned, but hey, it beat scrubbing toilets. Besides, I had a feeling that these bug-brained bureaucrats were about to learn a whole lot more about the power of human ingenuity and the surprising usefulness of garbage. A year later, Actharia Station was a changed place. The emergency foam cannons were back in service, fully funded, of course, but they were mostly used for ceremonial purposes. The real firefighting solution, a network of strategically placed nutrient reclamation tanks, each equipped with high-pressure hoses and staffed by teams of thoroughly trained and slightly nauseated Actharian soldiers. But the biggest change was in the Actharian culture. They had begun to question their rigid adherence to tradition, their fear of the unconventional. They had learned that sometimes the best solutions are the simplest, and that even the lowliest among us can have something valuable to offer. And me? I was living the high life. I had my own office, a hefty consulting fee, and a staff of eager Actharian assistants. I was even teaching a course on unconventional problem-solving at the Actharian Academy of Sciences. Of course, I still had to clean up the occasional mess. But now I had a whole station to play with. And who knows what other unconventional solutions I might discover. The universe, after all, is just one giant garbage heap waiting to be recycled. One day, while inspecting a particularly pungent batch of nutrient sludge, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A small metal object, half buried in the muck. I pulled it out, wiped it clean, and examined it closely. It was a USB drive, an Earth-made USB drive. My heart skipped a beat. What was a USB drive doing in Actharian sewage? And more importantly, what was on it? I rushed back to my office and plugged the drive into my computer. A single file appeared on the screen. A text document labeled Project Blue Dawn. I opened the file and began to read. The words on the screen sent a chill down my spine. Project Blue Dawn was a top-secret initiative by a shadowy organization back on Earth. Its goal, to infiltrate alien civilizations and subtly manipulate their development, guiding them towards a more human-friendly future. And my mission? I wasn't just a janitor. I was a sleeper agent, programmed to disrupt Actharian society and pave the way for human influence. The algae fire, the nutrient sludge, the unconventional solutions, it was all part of the plan. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. Had I been a pawn all along? Was my entire career on Actharia Station just a carefully orchestrated series of events? Then I scrolled further down the document and found a section labeled Contingency Plan in case of agent deviation. The first line read, "If agent exhibits signs of independent thought or resist programming, activate failsafe. Upload humorous cat videos to local data network. Subject will be immediately distracted and rendered harmless." I burst out laughing. Of course, it all made sense now. The constant stream of cat videos that had been inexplicably popping up on the Actharian network. It wasn't a glitch. It was my failsafe. And the best part? It had worked. I'd been so busy enjoying my new life, so distracted by the absurdity of Actharian culture, that I had completely forgotten about my original mission. I had become human. I deleted the Project Blue Dawn file and ejected the USB drive. Then I opened my web browser and searched for funny cat videos. After all, a grand sanitation consultant has to stay on top of the latest trends. And who knows? Maybe those cat videos could even help me solve the next big crisis on Actharia Station. The end? Or is it? My newfound position as grand sanitation consultant came with perks, namely a spacious office overlooking the sprawling Actharian landscape, which admittedly mostly consisted of various shades of green algae. But hey, the view was still better than the inside of a garbage compactor. I had a team of eager, if slightly bewildered, Actharian assistants, ready to carry out my every whim, or at least they pretended to be eager. I suspected that behind their multifaceted eyes, they were secretly wondering what bizarre task their human overlord would dream up next. One of my first initiatives was to overhaul the station's waste management system. The old system was a chaotic mess of overflowing bins, malfunctioning recyclers, and a general disregard for the concept of cleanliness. It was like a college dorm room but on a space station. So I implemented a new system based on the principles of reduce, reuse, recycle, and, repurpose with extreme prejudice. The Actharians were initially resistant to my reforms. They were used to doing things a certain way, and they didn't see the point in changing. But Grand Consultant, they would whine, why must we sort the organic waste into so many categories? Is not all refuse equally unpleasant? I would patiently explain the benefits of composting, the wonders of bioplastics, and the sheer awesomeness of turning garbage into art. They would nod politely, but I could tell they still thought I was crazy. But, slowly, things started to change. The station became cleaner, more efficient, and surprisingly, colorful. I encouraged the Actharians to get creative with their recycling. Soon discarded food containers were being transformed into elaborate sculptures. Broken machinery was being repurposed as avant-garde furniture, and the station's corridors were adorned with murals made from recycled algae. The Actharians, initially horrified by my artistic endeavors, began to embrace them. They discovered a hidden talent for crafting bizarre and wonderful creations from trash. The station, once a sterile and utilitarian environment, became a vibrant, chaotic, and surprisingly beautiful place. I even started a trash-to-treasure contest, which quickly became the most popular event on the station. The Grand Adjudicator, surprisingly, was a big fan. He even submitted a sculpture made from discarded dental floss, which, I have to admit, was pretty impressive. One day, while touring the newly renovated waste processing plant, I stumbled upon a curious sight. A group of Actharian workers were huddled around a pile of discarded technology, their multifaceted eyes gleaming with excitement. Grand Consultant, one of them said, we have discovered something intriguing. He held up a small metallic device. It was a universal remote control, the kind you could program to operate any electronic device. We believe, he continued, that this device could be used to control everything. I raised an eyebrow. Everything? I asked skeptically. Like the entire station? Precisely, he said. Imagine, Grand Consultant. We could control the lighting, the temperature, the life support systems, with a single device. I stared at the remote control, my mind racing. The possibilities were endless, but so were the potential consequences. I knew that putting that kind of power in the hands of the Actharians could be dangerous. They were, after all, a species known for their rigid adherence to rules and their tendency to overcomplicate things. Giving them the ability to control everything could lead to chaos or worse, a galactic-scale bureaucratic meltdown. But then again, I thought, maybe it could also be hilarious. All right, I said, a mischievous grin spreading across my face. Let's see what this baby can do. I took the remote from the Actharian worker and began to tinker with it. The Actharians watched with bated breath as I pressed buttons, flipped switches, and generally fiddled with the device. I had no idea what I was doing, of course. I was just making it up as I went along. But the Actharians didn't need to know that. Grand Consultant, one of them said nervously, are you sure you know what you're doing? This device is incredibly powerful. It could have unforeseen consequences. Relax, I said, waving my hand dismissively. I'm a professional, I know exactly what I'm doing. I pressed a random button on the remote, and the lights in the waste processing plant flickered and died. The Actharians gasped in horror. Oops, I said. Maybe I don't know exactly what I'm doing. But it was too late. The remote was activated and the station was now at my fingertips. Or, more accurately, at the tip of my thumb. For the next few days, I had the time of my life. I used the remote to play pranks on the Actharians, to redecorate the station to my liking, and to generally cause as much chaos as possible. I turned the Grand Adjudicator's office into a giant ball pit. I replaced the station's gravity with bouncy castles, and I made all the food taste like chicken. The Actharians were not amused. "Grand Consultant," they said, their multifaceted eyes narrowed in annoyance. "This is not appropriate behavior for a Grand Sanitation Consultant. You are supposed to be maintaining order, not creating chaos." "But where's the fun in order?" I said, shrugging. "Chaos is where the real party's at." But my reign of terror couldn't last forever, the Actharians, being the rigid, rule-following species that they were, eventually figured out how to override the remote. They confiscated it, restored order to the station, and threatened to throw me in the garbage compactor if I ever pulled a stunt like that again. I was disappointed, of course, but I couldn't say I didn't have it coming. I had abused my power, I had disrespected their culture, and I had generally been a pain in the algae. But hey, at least I had a good time doing it. A few weeks later, the station was struck by disaster. A fire broke out in the main reactor, threatening to destroy the entire station. The Actharians, in their rigid, procedural way, tried to put out the fire according to protocol. But the fire was too strong, too fast, and too, well, fiery. They were losing control of the situation, and panic began to set in. I watched the chaos unfold from my office window, a sense of guilt washing over me. I had been so busy causing trouble that I hadn't paid attention to the real problems facing the station. And now, those problems were about to consume us all. But then, an idea struck me. An idea so crazy, so audacious, so utterly ridiculous that it just might work. I grabbed my trusty universal remote, the one the Actharians had confiscated, and raced towards the reactor. "What are you doing, Grand Consultant?" they shouted, their voices filled with alarm. "You'll get yourself killed." "Don't worry," I said, a determined glint in my eye. "I have a plan." I arrived at the reactor, the heat searing my skin. The fire was raging, consuming everything in its path. The Actharians were huddled in a corner, their multifaceted eyes wide with terror. I raised the remote and pointed it at the fire. The Actharians looked at me like I was insane. "What are you going to do, Grand Consultant?" one of them asked. "Change the channel on the fire?" "Just trust me," I said. I pressed a button on the remote, the same random button that had caused the lights to go out a few weeks earlier. And then something amazing happened. The fire stopped. The flames flickered, sputtered, and then died, leaving behind a cloud of smoke and a room full of bewildered Actharians. "What? What did you do?" one of them stammered. I grinned. "I turned it off," I said. "Turned it off?" they repeated, their multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "You turned off the fire with a remote control?" "Yep," I said. "Turns out this isn't just any universal remote. It's well, it's kind of embarrassing. But it's a TV remote. And the main reactor? It's not a reactor at all. It's just a really, really big television." The Actharians stared at me, their minds struggling to comprehend the absurdity of the situation. "A television?" one of them finally said. But why would we have a television this big?" "Beats me," I said. "Maybe you guys just really like watching TV." It turned out that the Actharians, despite their rigid adherence to rules and their tendency to overcomplicate things, had a secret: love for Earth television. They had built the giant reactor as a way to watch their favorite shows on a truly epic scale. The fire, it turned out, was just a blown fuse. The Actharians were mortified. They had been so busy trying to maintain their image as a serious militaristic species that they had completely overlooked their own secret passion. They thanked me profusely for saving the station, and they promised to never judge a human by his job title again. As for me, I was hailed as a hero. I was given a medal, a promotion, and the key to the station's secret TV room. And from that day on, I was no longer just a human janitor. I was the human janitor who saved the station from a fiery death by changing the channel. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the hissing of the cooling reactor, or rather the cooling television. The Actharians buzzed with a mixture of shame and bewildered amusement, their multifaceted eyes darting between the deactivated screen and me. I leaned against a control panel, trying to look nonchalant despite the fact that I'd just single-handedly exposed their deepest, silliest secret. "So," I began, breaking the tension, "what were you guys watching? Was it Intergalactic Gladiators? Or maybe one of those human cooking shows? You know, the ones where they argue over spices?" The Grand Adjudicator, a particularly imposing Actharian with extra-large mandibles, cleared his throat. We were partial to Terran housewife dramas. He confessed this with the air of a general admitting to a fondness for collecting porcelain dolls. A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled Actharians. Terran housewife dramas? These guys, with their rigid code of honor and their obsession with strategic warfare, were hooked on shows about, well, housewives. It was almost too much to process. The interpersonal dynamics, the Grand Adjudicator continued, attempting to justify their guilty pleasure, are fascinating. The subtle nuances of betrayal, the complex web of alliances, it's all quite educational. He paused, then added with a hint of desperation, "From a strategic perspective, of course." I couldn't help but chuckle. Sure. Strategic housewife dynamics. I get it. I exchanged a knowing glance with a few of the Actharian workers, who were trying and failing to suppress their own amusement. The image of these militaristic aliens analyzing the tactical genius of a suburban mom scheming to steal her neighbor's husband was just too rich. The revelation of the Actharian secret TV addiction had a strange effect on the station. The rigid protocols seemed to loosen, the ever-present tension dissipated, and a sense of camaraderie began to emerge. The Actharians started incorporating elements of Terran housewife dramas into their daily lives. Debates in the council chamber were now punctuated with dramatic pauses and knowing glances. Military exercises were occasionally interrupted by impromptu fashion shows. And the food. Well, the food actually got better as the Actharians started experimenting with recipes they had seen on TV. Of course, there were some hiccups along the way. The attempt to resolve a trade dispute with a dramatic hair-pulling contest was unsuccessful, and the implementation of a secret sisterhood among the sanitation workers led to some truly bizarre cleaning schedules. But overall, the infusion of Terran housewife drama into Actharian culture was a positive thing. It humanized them, made them more relatable, and, dare I say it, a little bit more fun. As for me, I was promoted to Minister of Intercultural Exchange, a fancy title that basically meant I was in charge of finding new and exciting Earth TV shows for the Actharians to enjoy. It was a dream job, really. I got to watch TV all day and get paid for it, and I got to witness the hilarious spectacle of a militaristic alien species slowly but surely becoming addicted to the dramas of suburban life. It was the best job a human janitor turned accidental hero could ask for. And it all started with a fire, a remote control, and a very, very big television. The honeymoon period, however, couldn't last forever. The Actharian High Command, notorious for their inflexible adherence to tradition, began to express concerns. They had tolerated the initial cultural exchange as a temporary stress reliever after the near-disastrous fire, but the constant references to relationship dynamics and the increasing number of council meetings ending in dramatic outbursts were starting to wear thin. One day I was summoned to the Grand Adjudicator's office. The atmosphere was noticeably colder than usual. The adjudicator sat behind his desk, his mandibles twitching in what I could only assume was displeasure. "Minister," he began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, "we need to discuss the cultural impact of your programs." "Is there a problem?" I asked, feigning innocence. I thought everyone was enjoying Keeping Up with the Kardashians. The adjudicator winced. "While we appreciate the insights into family relationship, some of the behaviors are questionable. The constant squabbling, the blatant materialism, it's hardly conducive to a disciplined, militaristic society." "But it's entertaining," I protested. "And Besides, it's not like they're actually doing anything harmful. It's just drama. Drama, the adjudicator repeated, his mandibles clicking. Drama is a luxury we cannot afford. We are a species at war, Minister. We have enemies to crush, territories to conquer. We cannot afford to be distracted by frivolous pursuits. He paused, his gaze hardening. I'm afraid we're going to have to limit your access to Earth television. We appreciate your service, Minister, but the experiment is over. My heart sank. This was it. The end of my cushy job. The end of the Actharians' brief but glorious dalliance with reality TV. I had to do something. Wait, I said, an idea forming in my mind. What if I could show you something different? Something that combines the drama you crave with the strategic thinking you admire. The adjudicator raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. What do you have in mind, Minister? It's a show called Survivor. And so, the Actharians were introduced to the world of tribal councils, immunity challenges, and backstabbing, alliances. They were immediately hooked. The strategic gameplay, the social maneuvering, the raw, unfiltered competition, it was everything they loved about Terran housewife dramas, but with a militaristic twist. The Actharian High Command, initially skeptical, soon became avid viewers. They analyzed the contestants' strategies, debated the merits of different alliances, and even started placing bets on who would be voted off the island each week. The station was once again abuzz with excitement, but this time, it was a more productive kind of excitement. The cultural impact of Survivor was even more profound than that of the housewife dramas. The Actharians started incorporating elements of the show into their own society. They held immunity challenges to determine who would be in charge of the sanitation crew. They formed alliances to gain power in the council chamber. And they even started voting each other off the station, although thankfully the consequences were less severe than on the show. Of course, there were still some hiccups along the way. The attempt to resolve a border dispute with a fire-making challenge was controversial, and the implementation of a hidden immunity idol in the cafeteria led to some truly chaotic lunch breaks. But overall, the infusion of Survivor into Actharian culture was a positive thing. It channeled their competitive spirit, honed their strategic thinking, and, dare I say it, made them even more ruthless. As for me, I was promoted again, this time to Supreme Minister of Cultural Strategy. I had free rein to curate the Actharians' media diet, carefully selecting programs that would both entertain and educate them. It was a dream job, really. I got to watch TV all day and shape the culture of an entire alien species. And it all started with a fire, a remote control, and a very, very big television. But little did the Actharians know, I had an ulterior motive. I wasn't just trying to entertain them, I was trying to, well, you'll see. The adjudicator, now sporting a disturbingly accurate Jeff Probst tan courtesy of the station's repurposed UV sanitation system, leaned forward. Minister, he said, his voice laced with a newfound, almost unsettling enthusiasm, explain to me again the nuances of a blind side. I suppressed a grin. This was going even better than I had hoped. Well, Grand Adjudicator, I began, a blindside is when you vote someone off the island without them seeing it coming. It's a move that requires careful planning, deception, and a willingness to betray even your closest allies. The adjudicator's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Deception, betrayal. These are qualities we value in our military strategists. Exactly, I exclaimed. It's all about outwitting your opponents, just like in war. He nodded slowly, absorbing the information. So, the key is to make them believe they are safe, lull them into a false sense of security, and then to strike. Precisely, I said. And the more dramatic the blind side, the more respect you earn from your peers. The adjudicator's eyes gleamed with understanding. I see. So it's not just about winning. It's about winning with style. You're a natural Grand Adjudicator, I said, unable to contain my amusement any longer. You're a natural. Little did he know I wasn't just teaching him about reality TV. I was teaching him about humanity, about our capacity for both great good and great evil, about our love of drama, our obsession with competition, and our willingness to do whatever it takes to get ahead. And that, I realized, was the key to my plan. The Actharians were so focused on conquering other species, on expanding their territory, on maintaining their rigid social order, that they had forgotten something essential, what it meant to be alive. They had become automatons, blindly following orders, suppressing their emotions and sacrificing their individuality for the sake of the collective. They needed a spark, a jolt, something to shake them out of their complacency, and I was going to give it to them, one reality TV show at a time. My plan was simple. I'd subtly introduce human values and behaviors into Actharian society through the medium of entertainment. I'd expose them to our flaws, our weaknesses, our contradictions, and hopefully our strengths as well. I wanted them to see that there was more to life than war and conquest, that there was value in things like creativity, compassion, and yes, even a little bit of chaos. I wanted to show them that it was okay to question authority, to challenge tradition, and to think for themselves. Of course, I couldn't be too obvious about it. If they suspected my true intentions, they'd shut me down in an instant. So I had to be subtle, strategic, and, dare I say it, a little bit deceptive. But I was confident that, in the long run, it would all be worth it. Because I believed that, deep down, the Actharians were capable of change, that they were capable of evolving into something more than just a ruthless, militaristic species. And if a few seasons of Survivor were what it took to get them there, then so be it. I was ready to play the game. I was ready to scheme, to strategize, to betray, all in the name of, well, you'll see. The next day, I found myself summoned to the adjudicator's chambers, which now resembled a poorly decorated tiki bar. Apparently, the UV lamps doubled as tanning beds if you just, really cranked them up. The air smelled faintly of ozone and coconut. Janitor, the adjudicator, boomed, his skin a shade of orange that made him look like a sentient traffic cone. I have been pondering your reality television. And, I prompted, trying not to inhale too deeply. The coconut ozone combo was starting to get to me. He steepled his many fingers. I believe that we have been approaching interspecies relations incorrectly. I raised an eyebrow. This was progressing faster than I'd anticipated. Oh? Yes, he said, pacing back and forth. For centuries we have relied on brute force, on military might to subjugate other species, but what if there was another way? I leaned back, feigning nonchalance. Like what? Like alliance, he declared, as if uttering a forbidden word. Like friendship. He shuddered slightly. Like shared interests. I suppressed a snort. Shared interests? With the Actharians? The only thing they shared was a desire to conquer everything in sight. And how do you propose we achieve these shared interests? The adjudicator grinned, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Through competition, through deception, through the strategic elimination of rivals. He slammed his fist on a table, sending a stack of Actharian propaganda pamphlets fluttering to the floor. We shall host our own reality show, a show that will showcase our strength, our intelligence, and our benevolence, a show that will unite the galaxy under the Actharian banner. I blinked. He'd completely missed the point. Or maybe he'd embraced it in the most Actharian way possible. Either way, this was going to be interesting. And what role do you envision for me in this endeavor, Grand Adjudicator? He beamed. You, Janitor, shall be our creative consultant. You shall guide us in the ways of reality television. You shall help us craft a show that is both entertaining and persuasive. I'm your guy, I said, already picturing the chaos that was about to unfold. Excellent, he exclaimed. Now let us begin. I have already drafted a preliminary concept. It is called Actharian Idol, Conquest Edition. I winced. This was going to be a long, strange ride. The next few weeks were a blur of bad ideas and worse execution. The adjudicator, bless his pointy little head, had absolutely no concept of subtlety. Actharian Idol, Conquest Edition, involved contestants conquering planets in increasingly ridiculous ways judged by a panel of scowling Actharian generals. The only contestant who showed any promise was a Glarbonian slime mold that managed to absorb a small moon, but even that lacked pizzazz. I tried to steer them in a more palatable direction. Look, I said, surrounded by holographic projections of exploding planets and weeping alien dignitaries. People don't want to see real conquest. They want drama. They want backstabbing. They want someone to root for. The adjudicator frowned. Root for? Like roots? Do you suggest we feature sentient flora in our competition? No, I sighed. It's a metaphor. We need characters. We need love triangles, betrayals, unexpected alliances. He considered this for a moment, stroking his chin with a claw. Love triangles, could we weaponize them? Perhaps a triangular blade that induces affection? I buried my face in my hands. This was going to be harder than I thought. Okay, new approach. What about a cooking show? The room went silent. Even the holographic explosions seemed to dim in confusion. Cooking? The adjudicator finally croaked. What is cooking? I explained as patiently as I could, the art of combining ingredients to create edible dishes. I described the joys of a perfectly cooked steak, the subtle nuances of a fine wine, the simple pleasure of a grilled cheese sandwich. The Actharians were horrified. You consume other living things? One of the generals gasped, his mandibles clicking in disgust. You destroy their inherent life force for pleasure? Well, yeah, I said. I mean, you guys conquer planets, right? We all have our thing. The adjudicator, however, seemed intrigued. So, you are saying that we could conquer the taste buds of other species? That we could enslave their palates with our cuisine? I saw where this was going. I guess you could put it that way. And so, Galactic Gourmet Gauntlet was born. The premise was simple. Chefs from across the galaxy would compete to create the most delicious dish, judged by a panel of Actharian food critics who, admittedly, had never actually tasted anything before. The winner would receive galactic domination, or, bragging rights. The first episode was a disaster. A Volgonian chef tried to serve the judges a plate of sentient space slugs, which promptly bit the adjudicator's finger. A Glarbonian attempted to create a 5-dimensional soufflé, which collapsed into a singularity and nearly sucked the station into a black hole. And then there was the Zaglorgian, who insisted on preparing his dish live, using only his own digestive system. I watched in horror as the adjudicator turned to me, his face a shade of green I didn't think possible. Janitor, he croaked, I am beginning to suspect that your reality television is not all that it is cracked up to be. Give it time, I pleaded. It's just teething problems. We need to find the right contestants, the right recipes, the right flavor. He eyed me suspiciously. Flavor? Is that another one of your metaphors? I sighed. This was going to be a very long season. But then, something unexpected happened. A contestant from a little-known planet called Earth. She was a middle-aged woman named Agnes, and she looked utterly unimpressed by everything. She wore a floral apron, sensible shoes, and a permanent expression of mild disapproval. When the other contestants presented their exotic dishes, pulsating alien organs, bioluminescent fungi, self-assembling protein structures, Agnes simply set down a plate of cookies. Chocolate chip, she announced, as if daring someone to disagree. Freshly baked. The judges stared at the cookies as if they were dangerous weapons. What are these? The adjudicator finally asked, cautiously poking one with a claw. Cookies, Agnes repeated. You eat them. The adjudicator hesitated, then popped one into his mouth. He chewed slowly, his many eyes widening in surprise. He swallowed. He chewed another one, and then another. Soon all the judges were devouring the cookies like ravenous beasts. They were moaning, they were groaning, they were practically fighting over the last crumb. These are amazing, the adjudicator finally declared, wiping his face with a napkin. What is the secret to your magic? Agnes shrugged. Butter, sugar, flour, chocolate chips, and a little bit of love. The Actharians were dumbfounded. Love? They repeated, as if it were a disease. But it was undeniable. Agnes had won. With a plate of simple homemade cookies, she had conquered the palates of the galaxy's most fearsome warriors. The episode went viral. Species across the galaxy were clamoring for Agnes's cookies. Replicators were churning out chocolate chips by the ton. And the Actharians, well, they were confused, but they were also eating cookies. I found Agnes in the commissary, surrounded by a throng of adoring aliens, all begging for a taste of her magic. So, I said, leaning against a counter, did you ever think you'd become a galactic celebrity by baking cookies? Agnes chuckled, a warm, comforting sound. Honey, I've been baking cookies for 40 years. It's about time someone appreciated them. You know, I said, you could probably make a fortune selling these things. Agnes shook her head. Nah, I'm not in it for the money. I just like to see people happy. She paused, then winked. Besides, the adjudicator gave me the entire west wing of the station to use as my kitchen, and all the chocolate chips I can eat. I grinned. Sounds like a pretty sweet deal. As I walked away, I couldn't help but smile. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy wasn't so bad after all. And maybe, just maybe, all it needed was a little bit of cookies. But the story doesn't end there. Oh no. Remember how I said the Actharians were militaristic? Well, they didn't just stop at eating the cookies. They started studying them, analyzing them, deconstructing them. They wanted to know what made these cookies so irresistible, and what they discovered was terrifying. It turned out that the love Agnes put into her cookies wasn't just a metaphor. She had unknowingly been using a rare earth spice, cinnamon, that when combined with chocolate, produced a mild psychoactive effect on Actharians. An effect that made them docile, compliant, even friendly. The Actharian military saw the potential immediately. They began adding cinnamon to the food rations of their soldiers. They started distributing cinnamon-laced treats to conquered populations. And slowly, subtly, the Actharian Empire began to change. Aggression decreased. Diplomacy increased. The Actharians started negotiating treaties instead of launching invasions. They started building schools instead of weapons factories. They even started gardening. The galaxy was in shock. The most feared empire in the universe had been brought to its knees by a plate of cookies. Of course, it couldn't last forever. Eventually, someone figured out the truth about the cinnamon. There were protests, there were riots, there were even a few attempted assassinations of Agnes. But by then, it was too late. The Actharians had tasted peace. They had experienced empathy. They had learned to appreciate the simple things in life, like a warm cookie and a good conversation. The empire didn't collapse, but it did mellow out. The Actharians became known as the galaxy's premier diplomats, their military relegated to peacekeeping duties. They even started hosting intergalactic baking competitions with Agnes as the head judge. And me? Well, I went back to cleaning toilets. But every now and then, I'd sneak into Agnes's kitchen and steal a cookie. Because even a cynical, galaxy-hopping janitor needs a little bit of love in his life. And maybe, just maybe, the universe does too. The station's fire suppression system, they said. The most advanced in the galaxy, they boasted. So, where is this marvel? Jenkins asked, nonchalantly flicking ash from his bioengineered space cowl onto the pristine floor. The Xylar shifted its multifaceted eyes, a gesture Jenkins interpreted as a sigh of utter alien exasperation. It extended a slender, chitinous appendage toward a wall panel. Behold, the culmination of millennia of Xylar engineering. Jenkins followed the Xylar's appendage to a small, innocuous button labeled with a glyph that resembled a particularly angry space squid. He raised an eyebrow. That's it? A button? The Xylar vibrated slightly, a sign of increasing agitation. That button, as you so flippantly refer to it, is connected to a station-wide network of hydrofoam dispensers, capable of extinguishing any conceivable conflagration in mere attoseconds. Jenkins leaned in, peering at the button with mock seriousness. Hydrofoam, huh? So like fancy space soap? He pressed the button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. The Xylar's bioluminescent markings pulsed with a furious intensity. Human Jenkins, what do you think you're doing? That is a delicate instrument. Jenkins shrugged, unfazed. Just testing. You know, quality control. Can't have your attosecond foam dispensers failing during a real crisis, can we? He hammered the button repeatedly. Come on, baby, work for me. Suddenly, with a barely audible hiss, a small stream of viscous, iridescent foam dribbled from a nozzle in the ceiling, landing squarely on Jenkins's head. He blinked, wiping the substance from his eyes. Well, that's underwhelming. Looks more like space lotion than firefighting technology. The Xylar seemed to deflate, its vibrant colors fading to a dull, mottled gray. That is not supposed to happen. Jenkins grinned, picking a glob of the foam from his cowl and examining it with playful curiosity. Maybe it needs some, I don't. No oomph, a little human ingenuity? He began to hum, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I've got an idea. Jenkins, with a janitor's inherent knack for improvisation, rummaged through his cleaning cart. Amidst the assortment of alien-approved solvents and multispectrum dusters, he located a can of industrial-strength lubricant, a substance strictly intended for the station's perpetually groaning conveyor belts. Now, this, Jenkins declared, brandishing the lubricant like a prize trophy. This is what we need to give your fancy space soap some real kick. The Xylar recoiled, its chitinous plates clicking in what Jenkins assumed was a mixture of horror and disbelief. Human, that substance is highly volatile. It is not to be mixed with the hydrofoam under any circumstances. Jenkins ignored the Xylar's frantic warnings, his mind already racing with possibilities. He popped the top of the lubricant can, the pungent aroma of synthetic hydrocarbons filling the air. With a flourish, he sprayed a generous amount of the lubricant directly onto the nozzle of the hydrofoam dispenser. Just a little enhancement, Jenkins chuckled, stepping back to admire his handiwork. Think of it as pre-ignition. He pressed the button again. This time, the effect was far from underwhelming. Instead of a gentle dribble, a torrent of iridescent foam, now laced with a shimmering, oily sheen, erupted from the nozzle. The mixture shot across the corridor with surprising force, coating the walls, the ceiling, and most regrettably the Xylar in a thick, slippery layer. The Xylar emitted a series of high-pitched squeals, its multifaceted eyes wide with panic. It flailed its appendages in a futile attempt to wipe away the rapidly expanding foam. Human Jenkins, you have doomed us all. The station will be consumed. Jenkins, meanwhile, was doubled over with laughter.